Welcome to The Right Angle, the podcast that's all things English and fantasy. Hi, I'm Autumn.
And I'm Abby. And today, we're circling back to our personal D&D campaign now that we've wrapped up our last session.
It's been about 6 months since our last episode about our campaign, and so much has happened since then. In this episode, we'll be talking about the campaign's evolution, our characters' journeys, and what it means to end a story you've lived inside for over a year.
So that's why today we've brought back not one, but two familiar faces. You may remember Lydia from our episode about art and graphic design earlier this season, and Logan from our episode about coding and reluctant writing from season 1.
They've both played major roles in our campaign and have a lot of insight into how the story developed, both as players and as storytellers in their own right. Lydia, Logan, we're so glad to have you.
Hi, if you don't remember, I'm Lydia. Thanks for having me back on.
Thank you. Logan.
Yeah, thank you guys. So before we dive into our guests' experiences as players and as active parts of a collaborative story, Autumn, do you mind giving our listeners a Dungeon Master style recap of our campaign? Sort of like the ones you do before each of our sessions?
Yeah, of course. So we started off our campaign with the original 4 members meeting in jail in a town called Mirestone, and they went through this whole process basically via trial where they got the attention of a local lord named Lord Lucius Pennington, and he agreed to sponsor them and buy back their freedom from jail in order for them to work for him. He sent them on their first practice test to basically make sure that they wouldn't run away and just leave, which he kind of expected, but they followed through, and so they got sent on their first real quest, and these original 4 members being Willow, Fawn, Mia, and Mar. And they went on this quest basically to find out where this old war buddy of Pennington's went to, because he got this strange letter from him, and then he gotten word that this man just kind of disappeared. And they eventually found him, and that's where they met with 2 other party members, Ig and Fenrir, and Fenrir is played by Logan, and they joined the party from then on. And immediately after they had joined, they looked into the distance of this city that they now were in, called Holbeck, and they saw that this city was on fire. And being semi-heroes at this point, they decided to step in, and they found this pet shop. This magical pet shop was on fire, and they put it out, and then they helped find all of the animals that went loose. And that's when they learned that one of the owners of this pet shop had gone missing. And so they went on this quest to go find her, and this quest went a really long time, lots of traveling. And then they ended up finding out that this owner, her name is Kargyra, she was hunting for a dragon egg. And it turns out that she actually was a dragon and was the mother of the baby dragon that was going to be born from that egg. And so they teamed up with Kargyra to go and find the people who took the egg. And that ended up leading back to like Willow's home, where they met with her like semi-adoptive mother. And Willow learned that all of things that she learned growing up were kind of bad. She was kind of raised in a little bit of a cult. And so they killed her adoptive mother. And that's when they encountered a very important figure to the overall campaign story for the very first time, He Who Lives. And he is basically this lich, which is basically a wizard that has consumed so much power that they've got to the point where they've become practically immortal. They have these things called phylactery, which is basically like a Horcrux from Harry Potter, if you know what that is. So like part of his soul is embedded into this item, and the only way he can be killed is if this item is destroyed. And so after fighting him and then running, because they did not stand a chance, they ended up returning the baby dragon to the other pet shop owner, who was the husband of Kargyra, because sadly in the battle Kargyra passed. And during this whole returning scenario, one of the party members, Mar, gets kidnapped. But it's also at this point that we are introduced to Lydia's character for the first time, Anna Kim, who knows Kargyra and her husband very well and decides for the heck of it just to go on this adventure kind of as a little bit of a favor to her friends. And so it turns out that Mar is kidnapped to her home, which is an island called Maneth, and think of it kind of as Pirate Island. And basically they learn a lot about Mar and her backstory, and they figure out that she was once a pirate who served under the pirate queen, but she got mutinied off of her ship and has been running ever since. And now the pirate queen, Zora Zelroth, has finally found her and taken her back home to be put on trial, because mutiny is not taken lightly in this little pirate kingdom. And so while her friends arrive there, they try to save her, but then get captured themselves and are put through these trials to prove that they are loyal to Zora Zelroth, Queen of the Pirates. And sometime during this whole trial, we actually have a Christmas one-shot, which was run by Logan, where all of the characters were transported into hell, but like the cold, icy part, not the hot part. They go on a fetch quest, which is basically they have to gather a bunch of items for this really high-level devil who will then let them go back. And so they do, and they eventually free Mar, and then they go after her second mate, who was the one who mutinied against her, and they have this whole fight on this ghost ship, which we lovingly call Ghost Boat, and they defeat him, and they basically earn the trust of Zora Zelroth and are free to leave. Upon returning to Holbeck, the capital of the country that they've spent most of the time in, Cambar, from Maneth, the pirate country, one of the players, Anakim, tries to break into the royal palace and immediately gets arrested. And that's a whole debacle where the whole party basically has to save him, and then they learn a lot of secrets about just kind of everything in general, and that's where the big bad, so like the main villain of the campaign, was revealed to be Zelaxia, who is the patron of the party's warlocks. So she gives her magic in exchange for favors. And that's revealed, but also at the same time, it's revealed that their patron, Lord Pennington, is actually not quite what he seemed to be. He's actually this other NPC that they've been traveling with named Emigs. They fought with Emigs during the whole Kargyra debacle, and they became semi-good friends with him. What they were told was that Emigs was a good friend of Pennington, but spoiler, Pennington and Migs are the same person, and I'm not going to get into all the complexities of who this character is because that would take up much more time than we have. But anyway, they basically learn this really big secret, and Pennington / Migs, which Migs is what he goes by more now, permanently joins the party as a non-player character, so someone that I, as the DM, would play. We also learn at this point that one of the other players, Fawn, does not go by that name, actually. That's not her birth name. Her birth name is Firiel, and we find out that her little sister got kidnapped by this man who was very prevalent in Firiel's own life. And so the party goes on a long quest to go and find her, and they end up at a ball at this magical academy called the Elucidator Academy, and they meet a bunch of figures, and then they find the man who kidnapped Firiel's sister, but only to reveal that he doesn't have her, and they have to go to this whole other place to find her, but eventually they do find her, and that's where summer hit for us. And we didn't really know what to do because all of us had very busy schedules, and so what I decided, since I would be a little bit less busy over summer, that I would schedule individual sessions with people. The party would split up and do their own things until we're able to reunite back during the school year. And so that's what we did. And at this point in time, there have been a lot of interactions with the party with the gods of this world. And the gods are very much against Zelaxia and want to defeat Zelaxia. And so the gods send the party on this mission to find these magical artifacts so they would be able to defeat Zalaxia. And that's what happens over the summer. The party finds all these objects, and then they meet back up at this magical Feywild portal, which the Feywild is another dimension that's kind of like nature-y wonderland in a sense. And they have a decision to make at this point, because over the individual sessions, a lot of information is revealed about Zalaxia, specifically the fact that she isn't what the gods are saying she is. They're portraying her as this evil, terrible being who only wants to destroy and kill everything, while trying to cover up the fact that she actually once was a part of a god that was killed. And so the gods are basically trying to do this big old cover up to stop her from revealing the fact that they messed up a long time ago. And so now the party is kind of divided, trying to figure out what to do, whether or not to support Zalaxia or to support the gods. And it caused a lot of arguments amongst the party, both in character and out of character, because it was a very difficult decision. It was not black and white. It was very much gray. And eventually through this, Fenrir frees Zalaxia, who immediately goes up and starts killing the gods one by one. And the party realized that they did not like that choice. And so they went up there to defeat Zalaxia using this magic artifact that Emigs had been carrying around this whole time. And to do this, they had to defeat what we called the He Who's. So the party had already met He Who Lives, but there were actually 3 others, and they were beings created by Zalaxia to hold her power as kind of a last-ditch effort, so that one day when she has more power back, she'll be able to free herself with their help and regain the power that she once lost. So we have He Who Lives, He Who Wanders, He Who Dreams, and He Who Watches. The party defeats all of them, and then they are brought in front of Zalaxia, and they confront her kind of more emotionally to reach her and be like, hey, what you're doing is kind of messed up. Let's stop. And they, using this magical item, bring back this long dead god who kind of fixes everything. And then the party, realizing that their story is done together, split off and split ways. I know that was kind of a really, really long recap of probably not a lot that would make sense to someone who might be listening. So I'm going to have Lydia and Logan discuss their own characters to help get a better idea of what it was like to experience this campaign firsthand.
Hi, this is Lydia again, and I played Anakin throughout our entire campaign, and I had actually never played D&D before. I didn't really understand the concept of it too much. I thought it was just a bit of a game made up for the show Stranger Things, and so honestly, whenever I'd heard that they were putting together a group, I was really surprised to hear that it was a real game, and I was very happy that they let me on. But basically, this was kind of my first experience through this, and so I'd never really played, I guess, like a character before. I know whenever I was younger, I'd read a lot of stories and stuff like that, and I think that was like kind of the only experience I'd had close enough to ever playing a game like this before. And so I think whenever I was trying to think of a character, essentially what I was thinking was, at the time, I am going to be completely honest, I was a very sad person. I will not lie, which comes off as very sad. However, that was my biggest thing. My mentality was more making something that I'd almost be able to like relate to, so that way like it'd be easier for me to actually do something, because I didn't want to make it something completely like, because it was like I've never done this before, and so I wanted to do something that would be relatable. And so I essentially just made someone that was sad because I was sad, which may sound very nihilistic, but that was kind of my like mental processing of everything that was happening to me at the time. And so essentially that was where that came from. And so basically, the character that I made, name is Anakin. His species, I had to look into this because I didn't really know any of them, but he's an ASMR, which is just like a half angel. So very iconic to like a fantasy genre, kind of something I was able to really easily understand. And I didn't really know a lot about D&D classes as well, and so I just picked the one that looked the most appealing to me as a person. And so I chose a druid, which is essentially a nature kind of power person. I didn't quite understand them that well, and so I honestly just picked the one that was the most appealing to me, just because I wasn't quite sure what to do, which was the main basis behind that. And so essentially what he looks like is, again, just like an angel kind of looking person. I gave him white hair because I just really like people with white hair. Don't know where that's come from. And then I made him a little bit taller, a little bit tanner. And I remember he's from like a desert kind of area, so he's pretty tan. And that's basically what he looks like. And so essentially, whenever I was trying to think of a backstory, I, again, didn't really know much about D&D, and I didn't know if it was like a story that you had to make up. And so that's just kind of where I went from there, is just trying to make up a story that I would have personally found interesting. And so with the basics, it never really got revealed through the campaign because I made the character to where he wouldn't really tell anybody anything at all. So it never quite got revealed through the campaign. But how I made it up is essentially he was taken to an orphanage as a kid. And so basically I kind of made it to where growing up, I kind of made his character a very, almost kind of the opposite of myself, very like antisocial, not a very talkative or like wanting to be around people, which is a little bit of the opposite of me. And so with that, I did that partially because I just wanted to do something that wasn't myself. And also I made it so that whenever he was younger, because he kind of had those kind of like personality traits, he didn't really get along with anyone he was growing up with at the orphanage, which kind of led to some bullying incidents, just some stuff like that. And so essentially he only made basically one friend throughout his entire childhood, which was the son of somebody he kind of considered like a surrogate mother, which was, you know, a good thing for a while until one night, essentially what happened is he accidentally killed that kid that was his only friend and essentially his brother, which caused him to kind of run away from the place where he grew up from and just kind of become a very like emotionally distant person to kind of avoid being hurt like that ever again. But again, that was just something I made up because I would have found interesting and would have been like, oh, well, that's an interesting story to see how that person kind of grows. And that's just kind of essentially the backstory that I thought of for that. And so essentially throughout the campaign, I imagine at the start, he was a very closed off, from what I remember. I think somebody punched him because he was not being very nice, but a very like closed off, hurt someone before they hurt you kind of person. And also I imagine just like very small, almost not necessarily emaciated, just very, very like not looking so good at the start. But I imagine kind of throughout it, I feel like he kind of tried to like branch out, make some friends again. Even if like, you know, there was still a bit of a distance, I feel like he kind of branched out and made some friends. And then also throughout that, he kind of got a bit of a love interest with one of the players, Fariel, which I think kind of really pushed the growth since, you know, kind of letting people back into his life. And that's just kind of the route he took throughout the entire campaign.
Lydia, I know you mentioned that your decisions when creating Anakim were to create him as a sad character because it kind of reflected things going on in your life. Do you feel like imbuing a bit of your own experiences into a character helps you process things going on in your life? Do you feel like you grew along with your character? And also, do you think that this experience has anything to say about D&D as a way to explore yourself?
Oh yeah, definitely. I think I never have really ever had like an experience with just like, I guess almost just kind of like acting out something, and I didn't realize how kind of therapeutic that was to just kind of like process emotions I was maybe going through and just kind of not necessarily taking it out on somebody, but just kind of like exposing myself to certain kind of emotions that I didn't know I was feeling. And so I just really thought it was a really beneficial experience because I definitely noticed growth. I even noticed at the start of, I think I kind of like met this group during my like sophomore year, and I think at first, I was a very, just, reserved, very, very quiet at least from my own point of view. Didn't really felt like I belonged in the slightest, and so I was just very nervous around everyone at first. But I do feel like even, with D&D and everything, I just really grew a lot closer to everyone and just kind of finally felt like I was able to just kind of just, be myself, which I've always felt very uncomfortable with, and kind of just throughout this entire experience, I just was able to have my own character arc, I guess to say, that kind of was imbued with the character I was playing. And so I did, definitely notice that was a part of it. Very cathartic for me.
Thanks, Lydia. That was really great to hear from you on that. Now we're going to hear from our other guest who played a different character in the campaign.
Thank you. I played Fenrir, and he was I would say he was quite the polar opposite of Anakin and Lydia's player, because I have consumed a lot of D&D content. I've been around D&D for quite a while. When I was younger, my dad used to play it, and he doesn't have a party now or anything, but if he ever would find the opportunity, he still would. But I was always there kind of watching his games and seeing how the game is played from people back before the app for D&D was out with D&D Beyond. And so I got to see how people played it before the big technology boom. Not like that was our generation anyway. But it's always been a big hobby of mine, something I really enjoyed. And so when I heard about the campaign that you guys were having, I already had a couple of character ideas lined up. Two at the time. One, which was Fenrir, or sort of the foundation for Fenrir. And another one which I'll be playing in our next campaign, which I'm guessing will be a whole nother episode. But I already had the idea for Fenrir kind of built, and I was really just trying to hear of what the party was missing. So when I heard about it, I heard there was a lot of magic users, and so I went with the character idea that didn't quite use magic and was more of a big tanky guy. And so I took the foundation of my idea was this big tanky werewolf, pretty much. And so when I started creating my character, I was before I was actually moved into college. So I built his character based off what little information I could glean off of. Because when I started playing, I had very little information where the party was. So a lot of it was improv, and most of what my character did was purely improv, as D&D is. And so Fenrir was a very big improv, pretty much improv prompt after prompt after prompt. And his story grew with that, and Fenrir was a character that had a hatred for the gods in this world because he was cursed with lycanthropy, which is the proper term for werewolf, or the disease term for werewolf. And so this curse is what caused his hatred, and this hatred was a really big plot point, and it kind of evolved and developed into his drive for what a lot of his actions. And this curse was actually given by Zalaxia, the big bad. And so when she was revealed as the big bad, it caused this kind of panic in him, which caused him to do a lot of crazy things. And Autumn is laughing because I mean a lot of crazy things. My summer solo sessions were very, very productive, because when I heard we were going to get solo sessions, I knew I could do stuff that I couldn't normally do with a full party. And so I wanted to abuse that as much as I could. And so he, in fear of Zalaxia, he tried to grow his power as much as he could, so he could have a chance to face her with his party and to try and defend his party as much as he could. And then when it was revealed that Zalaxia's origin was not what he was told, it caused this twist in him that made him hate the gods even more. And so that sparked his idea to free her and make a deal with her to kind of control the outcome. And this was very opposed to the party. He was very much, pun not intended, but lone wolf character. He was very much opposed to the party and was as solo as you can get in D&D, because D&D is a party game, so when you have a solo character, it doesn't work out. So I tried to fit that as best as I could with this character, and I thought I did a decent job at it, but Autumn probably has other thoughts. And so I tried to play him as much as I could with having this solo kind of personality that he had. And Fenrir's actions were very guided in this hatred of the gods, but also in the protection of his friends. And in the end, he was willing to sacrifice himself for his friends. And so this sacrifice was really his big moment to prove himself to his fellow party members, and mostly to the other male player. I guess there was two, but one of the other dudes was playing Mia, so the other male character, which was his best friend Ig, and that was really to prove to himself that. But it was really fun to join, even if it was later in the. It was really fun to play this with you guys, as even though I joined later than the rest of you, and I guess Lydia joined the latest anyway. But I mean, I can't speak for her, but I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I'm sure she did. And it was just a great experience to develop this character arc and watch his other characters grow alongside of him.
From a DM perspective, it was really fun watching everybody experience their individual character arcs that I tried to tailor to them, because there's some people who very much like asked specifically, like, hey, in my character arc, can we have a ball? We did, in fact, have a ball because of this request. But there's some people who I kind of took it in a little bit different direction because they didn't give me necessarily a lot of suggestions on what they want, and there's no guarantee that if they did give me a suggestion, I would use it. But I would say Anakin and Fenrir are some of the people who didn't have necessarily specific character arcs planned out in the same way as some of the other people. So looking at Fenrir's arc, his was more overall throughout the campaign, especially towards the latter half when we got into dealing with the gods, whereas Anakin's character arc was more personal and more reflective on growing as a person rather than confronting things in his own backstory.
Thank you guys. So that brings us right into the heart of what made this campaign so memorable. Not just the characters, but the story we built around them.
Exactly. Let's take a step back and talk about how all of these moments came together to shape the bigger picture. So, Lydia and Logan, what moments felt the most cinematic or narratively powerful to you?
The first big reveal, I think that was the first cinematic thing that I experienced in the party, was the fact that Kargyra was a dragon. That was a really big jaw dropper. That was probably the first big cinematic moment, and the most, in my opinion, I think the most cinematic was the big reveal of either the reveal of Zalaxia being the BBEG or the big bad evil guy, because there was a very crazy train of events that led to that. And so when we actually got to that point, it was a very big shock to everyone, and it was played out very well by everyone and was told very well by you. And then probably, I would say my personal most cinematic moment would be during my summer sessions, because when retrieving the artifact that we were sent to gather, Fenrir learned more information than probably what was expected because of some of the crazy actions that he took. I mean, he made friends with an eldritch horror of sorts, and he was a very big lore dump. And so during this sort of, I would say, dream sequence, Fenrir was in this internal struggle. He had to make a decision and chose none of the decisions and made his own. And it was during that moment where he learned stuff, and it was really cinematic, even though no one else really got to experience it. I thoroughly enjoyed it and thought it was a good time.
So to clarify kind of like what was happening in this moment, Fenrir being a werewolf for his personal, we called them trials to get his magical artifact, he had to face the inner wolf inside. He had to basically decide whether he was going to essentially try and dominate it and take control and wrestle power from it, or if he was going to let it take control of him. And Fenrir basically went, I'm going to do what I want. I'm going to do my own thing, and befriended it instead. So he has this kind of third option that wasn't originally available, but because of the nature of D&D could happen, because it is improv, it is storytelling that we're making up on the spot. So that happened. Lydia, what thoughts do you have about this question?
I think while I was just kind of experiencing this, I think some of the biggest moments for me were kind of whenever you were describing things in a more descriptive sense. I think those for me were the most cinematic, because I was able to imagine what was happening just very, very well, because it felt like I was reading something, which is one of my favorite things about this, is it felt like I was reading something, which I really, really do enjoy reading and like just like getting to experience like a world that's not my own. And so I think just like those like very like descriptive where you're describing everything, those were kind of, to me at least, the most cinematic. Some of them weren't even big moments. Like I remember at some point you were describing this really pretty building. I don't really remember when that was, but I just felt like I was there and very immersed. And I think that was just kind of like one of my favorite parts. And I would have to agree with Logan. I think whenever we did like our summer sessions, I think those, for me at least, I just felt the most engaged because it was just like a one-on-one and I kind of choosing my own path and whatever I kind of just wanted to do. And again, just like being able to talk to you about it because you were able to just like describe what was happening. We kind of just like were able to like bounce off of each other. And I just found those to be the most fun. It's just like imagining kind of just like a story, like as if I were reading it. But yeah, those were kind of some of my favorite moments.
I have a quick question for Autumn because I know Lydia and Logan mentioned a lot of spontaneous moments. How were you as a DM able to balance structure with letting this chaos happen naturally?
I would say, first and foremost, through a lot of trial and error of just trying things out, because as someone who really enjoys writing and telling a story, it can be very difficult to not have control over where that story is going and letting other people have freedom, I would say, which I know sounds kind of funny, but it is this kind of act of just realizing I'm telling a story, but really I'm not. I'm making the setting and they're the ones telling the story. So it was very difficult to kind of let go, but once I did, I realized that there are a lot of easy ways for me to let this chaos kind of happen. And thankfully my party wasn't super chaotic and didn't just like abandon the plot altogether. They were pretty good about following the direction I had set up beforehand. But a lot of it was kind of creating these railroads, essentially. So not completely stopping what they want to do, but if I found that they were getting super duper off track or they weren't figuring out what I wanted them to figure out, kind of redirecting their focus in game using various resources. I think once I had like a child come up to them and lead them to a certain place in the city, because I knew if I let them just run free, they were never going to find it. And so having those built in and knowing beforehand of ways to redirect if they get off track, but also allowing for them to make their own choices and to follow the story that comes from it, because sometimes some of the best things that happened in our campaign were not things that I planned, like Anakin breaking into the palace. That moment caught me completely off guard and I had no idea what to do, but it led to some really cool moments between characters and it led to some of the coolest reveals that happened in the campaign. And so when I'm setting up for my campaign beforehand, I create a list of bullet points and I'm like, I want this to happen, this to happen, this to happen. But if it doesn't quite follow that order, if we go off track, it's not gonna ruin my day because it is in this bullet point form. These bullet points can change. It's flexible. There's a lot of room for spontaneity. So just building that in when you're planning as a DM is really what helped me allow the characters to move the story and to have these chaotic moments without completely getting derailed. One thing that I wanted to kind of hear about from Lydia and Logan's perspective is I spent actually a lot of time trying to figure out how to foreshadow events within the campaign, and I left lots of hints throughout, just trying to throw them in whenever I could. And I want to hear from you guys kind of what you picked up beforehand and what, looking back, you realize now was me foreshadowing.
I know one of the foreshadowing elements that you had was about Zalaxia being the big bad. I kind of picked up on it, but not fully. So the one he who lives was the Lich. I know you said this was something that we as the party completely missed, was that the cult that was bringing him back was worshiping this god with a name, which was an anagram for Zalaxia, which none of us really caught because we were too busy worrying about he who lives. But the thing I did kind of catch on to was in my backstory, Zalaxia was given a different name, a different anagram, and that's what my character knew her as. And so I kind of saw the anagram in there, but because I wasn't exactly sure how each name was spelled. I was like, that's just a funny coincidence.
I think because I joined a lot later than everyone else, a lot of the big reveals I wasn't really able to predict because I didn't know what was building up to it. So for the most part, I didn't really know what was going on for a little bit. But whenever I did start to kind of understand the plot and the world that was being built, I think some of the themes I picked up on were, I know one of the biggest parts about Zelexia, as we were kind of talking about, was that she was like essentially a part of a dead god. And I think I earlier had thought, oh, well, what happens if you brought her back together, kind of rejoined her souls? And I was just kind of thinking about that and how that'd be kind of cool if that could happen. And that's kind of what we ended up doing in the end. So I just thought that was cool how that just kind of came back up.
So at the end of the campaign, I did a little epilogue scene which foreshadowed the next campaign by including 2 side characters that appeared briefly within this campaign. And I revealed to you guys what I ended up naming the group, because throughout the entire campaign, I kept pestering the party of try and come up with a name for your group, come up with a name. And one thing that they kind of suggested, but more so jokingly than like realistically, was the Hot Mess Express. And so I took it upon myself to find a better name than that. And I ended up titling this campaign, this story, The Nameless. So how do you guys feel about that name, how the campaign ended? Do you feel like this is the last we'll see from The Nameless, or do you think in the future they might come back for a story or 2?
I thought that was really cool how you did that at the end. I know me and you, at least a little bit, had kind of talked about the idea of like, kind of like a multiverse or an alternate timeline and how that'd be kind of interesting to throw in there as just like a thought experiment. But then it came back, and so I was just really excited and was just surprised that that was actually a concept that could be realistically used. And I think that would be really cool if that were brought into like even like the campaign we're about to go on now that this one's ended. I thought that'd be a really cool idea because it's fun to bring back stuff that I thought might have been left behind, but maybe it'll come back. And I just thought that'd be really cool. I also thought it was really cool with at the end, you did not necessarily like a cliffhanger, but like a preview of what was to come. And it kind of reminded me at the end of like, I don't know, like a Marvel movie, for example, how they'll add in like the little thing at the end that kind of previews to something new or like some kind of secret. And I just remember thinking, I just want to hear everything and like get more as much out of that ending part as I could, because I just thought that was really interesting. But yeah, I just thought that was a really cool part of it.
Yeah, I think it'd be really cool to see. I know we talked, like each person went over their epilogue and what their characters were doing, but I don't know if it could be like the characters that ended the story, like the Nameless, which is a very fitting name, seeing as they were all pretty much nobodies. The main party started out in jail for very random reasons. I think it would be cool to see either a one-shot or something else after, but from, like Lydia said, an alternate timeline where maybe it's from a timeline where Zelexia won in some sort of apocalyptic setting. Because I know for a lot of the characters, in the way that the story ended, a lot of them gave up their powers to save the world. So they wouldn't, if we did a one-shot, they really wouldn't have anything to play as. Like their characters would be like commoners and the D&D commoner stat block. And so it'd be really hard to play it from the epilogue, but I think an alternate timeline would be a really fun thing to do. And as just a fun little one-shot.
Before we wrap this really long episode up, I wanted to see if you guys had any final thoughts about the campaign, maybe your favorite moment or just overall a final last statement you want to say about this story.
I think just like my final thoughts is, I think like overall going into an experience that I had really no clue what it was, which with a bunch of people I didn't already know that well, is honestly just like if you're thinking kind of like on the edge of like not even just trying D&D itself, just like trying something new, I'd say just go for it. I think this has been one of the most like beneficial experiences for me on like a like personal and like on a friendship level. I definitely say it was really beneficial to just try something out of my comfort zone. And I've just been really honored I was even invited to kind of join along with everyone in the first place. But yeah, so I think my final things or thoughts are just like to not be afraid to try something new.
Some of my final thoughts were that even though I've played a lot of D&D, I've never actually finished a campaign before, and so this was not just for me. I mean, if it was everyone's, because everyone else, it was their first campaign, but for me, who has been in multiple but never seen an end to them, it was really bittersweet to see something I've worked so hard on and helped create the story for come to an end. It was like finishing a really good book, and so it was a little sad to see it end, but I'm very happy with the ending that we got.
This campaign really became more than just dice and character sheets. It turned into a shared story about belief, identity, and growth.
And it's a reminder that storytelling isn't always about knowing the ending. It's about creating something meaningful together along the way.
Lydia, Logan, thank you both for being here and bringing so much life into this campaign.
And to our listeners, whether you're a writer, gamer, or just really interested in all things fantasy, we really hope you're inspired to start your own story, or like Lydia said, try something outside of your comfort zone. Well, that's it from The Right Angle, where we know the real magic isn't just in the story, it's in those who write it too.
Until next time, write boldly, read unapologetically,
And stay weird.